I never imagined that the worst day of my life would also become the day I'd have to face the truth I'd been hiding for 15 years. Standing there in my black dress, watching them lower my husband's casket into the ground, I felt my daughter Celeste's eyes burning into me like laser beams. And then she said those 5 words that shattered what was left of my world. "You knew, didn't you, Mom? My name is Victoria Ashford, and I need to tell you about the day everything fell apart." It was a Tuesday morning in October when the phone call came. The kind of call that splits your life into before and after. Detective Morrison's voice was professional but gentle, as he told me that my husband, Marcus, had been found dead in his hotel room in Chicago. Heart attack, they said, natural causes. But even as I collapsed to my knees in our kitchen, even as I screamed until my throat was raw, a small part of me whispered, "Finally." The funeral was held 4 days later at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in our small town of Millbrook, Connecticut. The autumn leaves were at their peak, painting the cemetery in shades of gold and crimson that seemed almost obscene against the backdrop of what everyone thought was my grief. Marcus had been a beloved figure in our community. At 48, he was the successful owner of Ashford Construction, a company that had built half the houses in our county. He coached Little League, served on the school board, and never missed a Sunday service. To everyone who knew him, Marcus Ashford was the perfect husband, the perfect father, the perfect man. But perfection, I've learned, is often just a mask worn by monsters. As I stood by his grave, accepting condolences from neighbors and friends, I felt like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. Mrs. Henderson from next door squeezed my hand and whispered, "He was such a good man, Victoria. You were so lucky to have him." I nodded and smiled, because that's what widows are supposed to do. But inside, I was screaming. The morning had started like something out of a nightmare. I had woken up at 5 a.m., staring at the ceiling of the bedroom I'd shared with Marcus for 23 years. The silence was deafening. No sound of his heavy breathing, no smell of his cologne, no fear of saying the wrong thing when he woke up. For the first time in decades, I had slept through the night without waking up in a cold sweat. I chose my funeral outfit carefully, a simple black dress that covered the fading bruises on my arms, long sleeves despite the October heat, and enough makeup to hide the exhaustion that had become a permanent fixture on my face. Looking in the mirror, I practiced my widow's expression, grief-stricken but composed, devastated but grateful for all the support. The lies came so easily now. After 23 years of practice, deception had become my second language. Celeste, my 23-year-old daughter, had been silent throughout the service. She had flown in from Seattle, where she worked as a graphic designer, and from the moment she arrived at the airport, I could see the questions in her dark eyes, questions I had hoped she would never have to ask. She looked so much like me at that age, tall and lean with dark hair and pale skin that showed every emotion. But where I had learned to make myself invisible, Celeste had grown up fierce and uncompromising. She had gotten that strength from somewhere, and it certainly hadn't been from Marcus. The service itself was a masterpiece of hypocrisy. Pastor Williams spoke about Marcus's dedication to his family, his generosity to the community, his unwavering faith. I listened to every word while memories flashed through my mind like scenes from a horror movie. Marcus's fist connecting with my jaw, his hands around my throat, his voice hissing threats in my ear while Celeste slept in the next room. Marcus Ashford was a man who built things, Pastor Williams said from the pulpit. He built homes, he built businesses, he built lasting relationships. But most importantly, he built a legacy of love that will live on in the hearts of those who knew him. I wanted to laugh or scream, maybe both. Marcus had built things. All right. He had built a prison around me and called it love. He had built a reputation on lies while terrorizing his family behind closed doors. He had built a legacy of fear that had shaped every day of my life for over 2 decades. During the graveside service, I noticed how the other mourners looked at me. There was pity in their eyes, sympathy for the devoted wife who had lost her soulmate. If only they knew the truth, that I wasn't mourning Marcus's death. I was celebrating my freedom. But as the service progressed, I became increasingly aware of Celeste watching me. She stood beside me, tall and composed, but I could feel her studying my every reaction. When people offered their condolences, she watched how I responded. When they shared memories of her father, she watched my face for any crack in the facade. The reception was held at our house, a sprawling colonial that Marcus had built with his own hands when Celeste was just a baby. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had built our prison with the same hands that had terrorized us for years, but the guests didn't know that. They filled our home with casseroles and flowers, sharing stories of Marcus's generosity and kindness. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, accepting hugs and platitudes, counting the minutes until everyone would leave and I could finally breathe. The house felt suffocating with all these people in it, all of them praising a man who had made my life a living hell. He was always so helpful, said Jim Brookfield, Marcus's business partner. Just last month, he helped my son move into his new apartment. Wouldn't take a dime for it. Just said that's what neighbors do for each other. I smiled and nodded, remembering that same day when Marcus had come home in a rage because helping Jim's son had made him late for dinner. He had thrown his plate against the wall and made me clean it up while he screamed about how ungrateful everyone was. Such a devoted family man, added Rachel Morrison, the detective's wife. He talked about you and Celeste constantly. You could see how proud he was. Pride. That was one way to describe Marcus's obsession with controlling every aspect of our lives. He was proud of how well he had trained us to fear him, proud of how convincingly we could play the happy family in public. But Celeste was watching me, and I could feel her growing suspicious with every forced smile, every perfectly timed tear. She had always been perceptive, even as a child. It was one of the qualities that had made Marcus so angry with her. She saw too much, understood too much. As the afternoon wore on, the stories became more elaborate, the praise more effusive. Marcus was being transformed into a saint before my eyes, and with each kind word, I felt the weight of the truth pressing down on my chest like a boulder. Remember when little Tommy Hendricks broke his arm, and Marcus drove him to the hospital because his parents were out of town? Asked Mrs. Patterson, Celeste's old math teacher. He stayed there all night until they got back. What she didn't know was that Marcus had only done it because half the town was watching, because it was the kind of gesture that would enhance his reputation. And when he got home, he had been furious about the hospital bills we had to pay, taking his anger out on me with a beating that left me unable to sit properly for a week. It was when the last guest finally left that Celeste cornered me in the kitchen. The house felt enormous and empty without all the people, and suddenly it was just the two of us, standing among the dirty dishes and leftover food. The silence was oppressive, filled with 23 years of unspoken truths. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." I was loading the dishwasher, my hands shaking as I stacked the plates. The simple domestic task felt surreal after the elaborate performance I had just given. "Celeste, honey, I'm exhausted. Can we do this tomorrow?" "No." Her voice was firmer now, and I recognized the steel in it that had gotten her through college, through building her own life, through escaping this house. "We can't. Because I know, Mom, I know what he did to you, to us." The plate slipped from my hands and shattered on the kitchen floor. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot, and for a moment, I was transported back to all the other times plates had broken in this kitchen, thrown in anger, knocked from my hands when I tried to shield myself from his blows. I stared at the broken pieces, seeing my life reflected in the sharp fragments. 23 years of carefully constructed lies, shattered in an instant. "I don't know what you're talking about," I whispered. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew it was over. The lie I had been living for 15 years was finally crumbling, and there was no way to put the pieces back together. Celeste knelt down and started picking up the pieces, her movements careful and deliberate. She had learned to be careful around broken things, another skill Marcus had taught us both. "I remembered something today," she said without looking up. "During the service, when Pastor Williams was talking about Dad's legacy, I remembered the night I heard you crying in the bathroom. I was 8 years old, and I got up to get a glass of water. You were sitting on the bathroom floor, and your lip was bleeding." My breath caught in my throat. I remembered that night. Marcus had been angry about something at work, and I had made the mistake of suggesting he talk to his business partner about it. He had backhanded me so hard that my tooth had cut through my lip. "Celeste, you told me you had fallen down the stairs." She stood up, holding the broken pieces in her cupped hands. But there was something else, something I couldn't remember until today. "There was a bruise on your neck, Mom, shaped like fingers." The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall, the same clock that had counted down the seconds, minutes, and hours of my imprisonment. Each tick had been a reminder that time was passing and I was still here, still trapped, still too afraid to leave. "I started remembering other things too," she continued, her voice getting stronger. "The way you always flinched when he came home late, the way you would send me to my room whenever he started raising his voice, the way you would wear long sleeves, even in summer, makeup that was always just a little too heavy around your eyes." Each observation hit me like a physical blow. I had thought I was being so careful, so subtle. But children see everything, don't they? They notice the things adults think they're hiding. "I remembered how you would watch him constantly," she went on, "like you were always waiting for something bad to happen, and how sometimes, when he was being especially charming to other people, you would get this look on your face like you were going to be sick." I wanted to lie, to protect her from the truth, just as I had been trying to do for 15 years. But looking at her face, so strong, so determined, so much like the woman I had been before Marcus broke me, I realized that my silence had been its own kind of abuse. I had thought I was protecting her, but I had been protecting him instead. "You want to know the truth?" I said, my voice barely audible. "The truth is that your father was a monster. And yes, I knew, and I stayed anyway." The words hung in the air between us like a confession at a crime scene. There was no taking them back now, no pretending anymore. After 23 years of lies, the truth was finally free. The words hung in the air between us like a confession at a crime scene. Celeste's face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse. But instead, she straightened her shoulders, a gesture I recognized as pure defiance, something she had inherited from me before Marcus had beaten it out of me. "Why?" she whispered. "Why didn't you leave him?" I moved to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard where Marcus had built Celeste a swing set when she was 5. He had been so proud of that swing set, had taken pictures of himself pushing her on it. Those photos still sat on our mantel, a monument to the lie we had all been living. But I remembered the real story, how he had built it, not out of love, but out of guilt after I had threatened to call the police following a particularly brutal beating. "Because I was 25 years old and scared out of my mind," I said, still staring out the window. "Because he told me that if I ever tried to leave, he would kill me and make it look like an accident. Because he was respected in this town, and I was just the girl from the wrong side of the tracks who got pregnant and trapped him into marriage." The last part wasn't entirely true. Marcus had pursued me relentlessly when we met at a college party in Hartford. I was a sophomore studying elementary education, and he was a senior in business. He was charming, handsome, and seemed to offer everything I had never hated: stability, security, a future. But charm, I learned too late, can be a weapon as deadly as any gun. "Tell me how it started," Celeste said, settling into one of the kitchen chairs. "I need to understand. Mom, I need to know how we got here." I turned away from the window and really looked at my daughter. She was 23 now, the same age I had been when I married Marcus. But where I had been naive and desperate for love, she was strong and self-possessed. Somehow, despite everything, I had raised a woman who knew her own worth. The first time he hit me was 3 months after we got married, I began, my voice gaining strength as I finally gave voice to secrets I had carried for decades. We were in our first apartment, that little place on Elm Street above the bakery. I had made dinner, but it was cold by the time he got home from a job site. He backhanded me so hard I saw stars. I could still taste the blood from where my teeth had cut my lip. Still feel the shock of realizing that the man I had married was capable of violence. What did you do? Nothing. I was so stunned I just stood there while he screamed at me about being a worthless wife who couldn't even keep dinner warm. Then he cried and apologized and swore it would never happen again. He bought me flowers the next day, told me he had been under stress at work, promised he would get counseling. But it did happen again. It always happens again, I said, sitting down across from her. That's what I didn't understand then. The violence always escalates. First it was just slaps when I did something wrong. Then it was punches. Then it was worse. The pattern had been so predictable in hindsight. The honeymoon period would last weeks, sometimes months. Marcus would be the perfect husband, attentive, loving, generous. He would bring me flowers, take me out to dinner, tell me how lucky he was to have me, and I would start to believe that maybe he had changed. Maybe the violence had been an aberration. Then something would trigger his anger. A bad day at work. A bill that was higher than expected. Something as simple as me forgetting to pick up his dry cleaning. The tension would build like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. I would try to be extra careful, extra accommodating, but nothing I did could prevent the inevitable explosion. When did you figure out that something was wrong? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, thinking. I don't think I ever didn't know, if that makes sense. I was too young to understand what was happening, but I knew there was something scary about Dad. I knew that when his voice got a certain tone, I needed to disappear. You were such a quiet child, I said, and my voice broke a little. I used to worry that you were too quiet, but then I would realize that the quiet was what kept us safe. The truth was that Celeste had learned to read Marcus's moods as well as I had. She had developed an uncanny ability to sense when he was about to explode, and she would make herself scarce. I had often found her hiding in her closet or under her bed when Marcus was in one of his rages. I remember being afraid to make noise, she said, afraid to run in the house, afraid to laugh too loud, afraid to cry when I got hurt. It was like we were all walking on eggshells all the time. We were. That's exactly what we were doing. I got up and made us both tea, needing something to do with my hands. The familiar ritual of boiling water and steeping the bags gave me time to gather my thoughts, to figure out how to explain 23 years of psychological torture to my daughter. Tell me about the worst time, she said suddenly. I need to know, Mom. I need to understand what you went through. I closed my eyes and let myself go back to that night in January. 8 years ago. Celeste had been 15, and she had gotten detention for talking back to her math teacher. Marcus had been furious, not at the detention, but at what he saw as a reflection on his parenting, his reputation. You were at your friend Delilah's house for a sleepover, I began. Your father had been drinking, which always made everything worse. He was angry about something at work. A client had refused to pay for some additional work, and Marcus had taken it as a personal insult. That night, Marcus had been looking for a fight from the moment he walked through the door. He had found fault with everything. The temperature of the house, the dinner I had prepared, the way I had folded his shirts. But what had really set him off was when he had found the note from Celeste's teacher about the detention. He was convinced that your behavior was a reflection of my parenting, I continued. He said I was too soft on you, that I was raising you to be disrespectful and defiant. He blamed me for not teaching you to show proper respect to authority figures. What did he do? I took a shaky breath. He grabbed me by the throat and slammed me against the kitchen wall. The same wall where we're sitting now. He squeezed until I couldn't breathe, until black spots danced at the edges of my vision. That night had been the closest Marcus had ever come to actually killing me. I had felt my consciousness slipping away, felt my body going limp in his grip. But at the last second, he had let go, and I had collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. "What did I do wrong?" I had gasped. "You exist," he had whispered back. "You and that ungrateful daughter of yours. You're both burdens I never wanted." But I couldn't tell Celeste that part. I couldn't tell her that her father had wished she had never been born. "He put me in the hospital that night," I said instead. "Told everyone I'd fallen down the basement stairs. Dr. Patel knew better. He had seen me too many times with suspicious injuries, but he couldn't do anything without my cooperation, and I was too scared to tell the truth. Why didn't you call the police?" "I did. Once." The memory was bitter in my mouth. "When you were 10, Officer Bradley came to the house, and Marcus was so charming, so convincing. He told them we had a misunderstanding, that I was emotional because of female problems. He actually used those words, female problems. And they believed him because he was Marcus Ashford, pillar of the community. I remembered watching from the kitchen window as the police car pulled away. Remembered the look on Marcus's face when he turned back to me. It was a look of triumph, of complete dominance. He had proven that even the law couldn't touch him. What happened after they left? The beating that followed was the worst one yet. He made sure to hit me where the bruises wouldn't show, and he told me that if I ever called the police again, he would make sure I disappeared permanently. The systematic nature of that beating had been what convinced me that Marcus wasn't just an angry man who sometimes lost control. He was a calculated predator who knew exactly what he was doing. After that, I knew I was truly alone, I continued. The system wasn't going to save me. My parents were dead. I had no siblings, no real friends. He had isolated me so completely that I didn't even know how to reach out for help. But you must have thought about leaving. Every day. I fantasized about it constantly. I would lie awake at night planning how I would do it, where I would go, how I would support myself, how I would keep you safe. But every time I got close to actually doing it, he would sense it somehow. It was like he could read my mind. Marcus had been a master manipulator, skilled at sensing when I was pulling away from him. Whenever I started to gain a little independence or confidence, he would find a way to tear me down again. He would isolate me from anyone who might offer support, and he would remind me constantly of how dependent I was on him. He controlled everything, I explained. The money, the car, even my access to the phone. He would check the call logs, monitor my internet usage, question me about every person I talked to. I felt like I was under surveillance 24 hours a day. How did you survive it? I developed what I called the other Victoria, the woman who could smile and nod and agree with everything Marcus said, who could play the part of the happy wife in public. She wasn't real, but she kept me alive. Celeste was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I should have known," she whispered. "I should have done something." "You were a child," I said fiercely. "None of this was your responsibility. I was the adult, and I made the choice to stay and try to protect you the only way I knew how, by sacrificing yourself, by surviving, by making sure you got out of this house intact." I reached across the table and took her hands. And I succeeded, didn't I? Look at you. You're strong, independent, successful. You got away from him, but you didn't. No, I admitted. I didn't. I told myself I was staying to protect you. But the truth is, I was also staying because I was terrified. He had convinced me that I was worthless, that no one would ever want me, that I would be homeless and destitute without him. By the time you graduated high school, I had been with him for 23 years. I didn't know how to be anyone else. The confession hung between us, raw and painful. I had never admitted that to anyone, not even to myself. But sitting here in this kitchen, where so much of my life had been stolen from me, I finally understood that fear had been my prison as much as Marcus had been. "What changed?" Celeste asked. What made you finally think about leaving? You did, I said simply. When you moved to Seattle, when I saw how happy and confident you were living your own life, I realized that maybe there was hope for me too. Maybe it wasn't too late to find out who Victoria Ashford could be without Marcus controlling her every move. Were you planning to leave him? I nodded. I had been making preparations for months. I had hidden some money, copied important documents, even found a lawyer who specialized in domestic violence cases. I was just waiting for the right moment, trying to work up the courage. What stopped you? Fear. And then, before I could act on it, he was dead. I paused, taking a deep breath before revealing the secret that had been eating at me for months. There's something else, I said quietly. Something I need to tell you about the night he died. Celeste's eyes widened. What do you mean? I took another deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would change everything between us forever. I mean that Marcus didn't die of natural causes, at least, not entirely. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Celeste stared at me as if I had just told her I was an alien from another planet. Outside, the October wind was picking up, rattling the windows that Marcus had installed himself just 2 years ago. Everything in this house bore his mark, his touch, his violence. But soon, I hoped, none of that would matter anymore. What are you saying? Celeste's voice was barely a whisper. I stood up and walked to the kitchen drawer where I kept the important papers. Insurance documents, warranties, and hidden beneath them all, the letter that had arrived just 1 week before Marcus's death. I pulled it out with trembling fingers and set it on the table between us. This came from Dr. Patel's office, I said. Test results. Marcus had been having chest pains for months, but he was too proud to see a doctor. Finally, the pain got so bad that he couldn't ignore it anymore. He went for tests while he was on that business trip to Chicago. Celeste picked up the letter and read it slowly. Her face went white as she absorbed the information. I watched her process each medical term, each terrifying statistic. Severe coronary artery disease, she read aloud. 90% blockage in the left anterior descending artery. Recommendation for immediate bypass surgery or cardiac catheterization. Patient advised the condition is life-threatening and requires urgent intervention. He was a walking time bomb, I continued. Dr. Patel said he could have a massive heart attack at any moment, that any stress, any physical exertion, any emotional trauma could trigger it. The doctor was amazed that Marcus was still walking around, let alone working construction and flying around the country for business. Did Dad know about this? I nodded grimly. He called me from Chicago the night before he died. He was furious, not about the diagnosis, but about what it meant for his business, his reputation. He was convinced that word would get out and people would think he was weak. That phone call had been typical Marcus. No concern for his health or his family. Just rage at the universe for daring to inconvenience him. He had screamed at me for 20 minutes about how this was somehow my fault, how the stress of dealing with me and my constant complaining had damaged his heart. He blamed you for his heart condition. He blamed me for everything. According to Marcus, if I had been a better wife, more supportive, less of a burden, his heart would have been fine. He actually said that my nagging had probably caused the blockages. I remembered sitting in this kitchen, holding the phone away from my ear as he raged about how I had ruined his life, how I had literally broken his heart with my selfishness and ingratitude. Even facing his own mortality, he couldn't take responsibility for anything. But Mom, Celeste said slowly, this says he died of natural causes. A heart attack. How is that not natural? I sat back down and looked at my daughter. This strong, beautiful woman who deserved to know the truth, even if it destroyed her image of me forever. The weight of what I was about to confess felt crushing, but I had carried this secret alone for too long. Because I made sure it happened, I said. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would never stop spreading. Celeste's face went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds. Confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally, a dawning understanding. "You called him," she said. "You called him and told him something that made his heart stop." I nodded. "I waited until I knew he would be alone in his hotel room. I had been planning what I would say for days. Ever since I got that letter, I knew exactly what words would push him over the edge. For 23 years, I had been the perfect victim, passive, accommodating, always trying to minimize his anger, but that night, for the first time in our marriage, I had chosen to maximize it instead. The memory of that conversation was burned into my brain. I had sat in this very kitchen, staring at the bruises on my wrists from his last rage 3 weeks earlier, and dialed his number with steady hands. My heart had been pounding, but my voice had been calm when he answered. "I told him I was leaving him," I continued. "I told him I had already contacted a lawyer, that I was going to tell everyone in town what he really was. I told him about the photos I had hidden, the medical records, the diary I had been keeping for years. You had evidence? I had everything. 23 years of documentation that I had been too scared to use. Photos of my injuries, recordings of his threats, medical records from all the times he had put me in the hospital. I had been collecting it for years, telling myself that someday I would have the courage to use it. I had been methodical about it, especially in the last few years. Every bruise photographed and dated, every hospital visit documented, every threat recorded on a small digital device I had hidden in the kitchen. I had built an airtight case against him, one that would have destroyed his reputation and probably sent him to prison. But that night, knowing he was dying anyway, I finally found my courage, I went on. I told him I was going to destroy his reputation, his legacy, his precious business. I told him that history would remember him as the monster he really was. What did he say? He screamed at me, called me every name in the book, threatened to kill me when he got home, to make it look like an accident just like he had always promised. But I could hear it in his voice, the panic, the fear. For the first time in our marriage, he was the one who was scared. I had pushed him further then, telling him that I had already started talking to people, that Mrs. Henderson had seen him hit me in the driveway last month, that Pastor Williams had been asking questions about my frequent absences from church. None of it was true, but Marcus didn't know that. I told him that Detective Morrison had been asking questions too, I continued, that people were starting to wonder why his wife was so clumsy, why she had so many accidents. I told him his perfect reputation was already cracking, and that by the time I was done, everyone would know what a pathetic, violent coward he really was. And then he made a sound I had never heard before, a gasp, followed by this awful silence. I stayed on the line for 10 minutes, listening to nothing. Part of me wanted to call for help, but a bigger part of me just waited. I knew he was gone, and I felt nothing but relief. The hotel staff had found him the next morning, slumped over his desk with the phone still in his hand. The official cause of death was myocardial infarction, a massive heart attack brought on by stress and his underlying condition. No one questioned it. No one investigated further. The grieving widow had been consoled and supported by the entire community. "Do you think what I did was murder?" I asked my daughter. Celeste was quiet for a long time, staring at the letter in her hands. When she finally looked up, her eyes were clear and determined. "I think what you did was survive," she said. "I think you used the only weapon you had left, the truth, to finally fight back against someone who had been trying to kill you for 23 years. But he's dead because of me. He's dead because he was a violent man whose body couldn't handle the stress of his own evil being exposed. You didn't kill him. Mom, you just refused to protect him anymore." Her words hit me like a physical blow, but instead of pain, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Validation. For months, I had been tormented by guilt, wondering if I was as bad as Marcus, if I had become a killer. "I've been so afraid," I whispered. "Afraid that you would hate me if you knew the truth. Afraid that I was as bad as he was. Afraid that I had become the very thing I had been running from." "You're nothing like him," Celeste said fiercely. "You're a survivor. You're the strongest person I know. I don't feel strong, I feel broken. Broken things can be repaired, she said, reaching across the table to take my hands. But first, you have to acknowledge that they're broken, and you have to want to fix them. I looked around the kitchen, at the house that had been my prison for so long. For the first time since Marcus's death, I allowed myself to imagine a different life, a life where I didn't flinch at sudden noises, where I could sleep without locking my bedroom door, where I could be myself without fear. I want to sell this house, I said suddenly. I want to burn it down and salt the earth, but I'll settle for selling it. Celeste smiled, the first real smile I had seen from her all day. Where would you go? I don't know. Maybe Seattle. Maybe I could be close to you, if you would want that. I could get a little apartment, maybe go back to school, finish my teaching degree. I'm only 48. I could still have a whole other life. I would love that, she said. But, Mom, there's something else we need to talk about. Something I haven't told you. My heart sank. After everything we had shared, after all the secrets that had been exposed, I wasn't sure I could handle any more revelations. But looking at Celeste's face, I knew that whatever she was about to tell me was going to change everything once again. What is it? The real reason I came home for the funeral, she said. It wasn't just to say goodbye to Dad. It was because I've been seeing a therapist, and she helped me remember things. Things I had blocked out. What kind of things? Things about Dad. About what he did to me. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as the implications sank in. The room seemed to spin, and I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. What are you saying? I'm saying that you weren't the only one he hurt, Mom, and it's time we both stopped keeping his secrets. The world tilted on its axis. Everything I thought I knew, everything I had believed about my sacrifice, about protecting my daughter, crumbled in an instant. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white, and for a moment I thought I might actually pass out. No, I whispered. No, that's not possible. I would have known. I would have seen the signs. But even as I said it, pieces began falling into place like a jigsaw puzzle I'd been trying to solve for years. Celeste's night terrors when she was young, the way she'd cling to me when Marcus tried to hug her, her desperate need to get as far away as possible for college, the way she'd never brought boyfriends home, never talked about dating, never seemed to trust men. You were trying so hard to protect me from seeing him hurt you, Celeste said gently. But you couldn't protect me from everything. And he was very careful, very strategic. My stomach lurched. I ran to the sink and dry heaved, my body rejecting the horrible truth that was settling into my bones. When the spasms stopped, I turned back to find Celeste watching me with eyes full of pain and understanding. How long? I asked, my voice barely audible. It started when I was 9. It stopped when I was 15. 6 years. 6 years of my daughter suffering while I thought I was protecting her. 6 years of failing at the one thing that mattered most. The magnitude of my failure crashed over me like a tsunami, and I sank into the chair feeling like my legs could no longer support me. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was a child, and he told me it was normal. He told me all fathers did this with their daughters, but it was a special secret that other people wouldn't understand. He told me that if I ever said anything, he would hurt you worse than he already was. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I could see it all. The elaborate web of manipulation Marcus had woven around us. He'd used my love for Celeste to control me, and used his abuse of me to control her. We'd both been trapped in a prison of our own making, each of us sacrificing ourselves to protect the other. He used you to control me, and used me to control you. That's exactly what he did. Even at 9 years old, I could see how he was hurting you. I was so afraid that if I told you what he was doing to me, it would make him angry enough to kill you. The sophistication of his manipulation was breathtaking. He'd turned us into unwitting conspirators in our own abuse, each of us silencing ourselves out of love for the other. never realizing that our silence was what enabled him to continue. "Tell me what happened," I said, steeling myself for what I knew would be the hardest conversation of my life. "It started gradually," Celeste began, her voice steady but distant, like she was recounting someone else's story. "At first, it was just inappropriate touching during what seemed like normal affection. He'd hug me a little too long, let his hands wander where they shouldn't. When I'd try to pull away, he'd tell me I was being silly, that fathers and daughters were supposed to be close. I felt like I was going to be sick again, but I forced myself to listen. Celeste needed to tell this story, and I needed to hear it, no matter how much it destroyed me. "He was very careful about when and where," she continued. "It only happened when you weren't home, or when you were in the shower, or asleep. He'd always have an excuse ready if you came back unexpectedly. We were just roughhousing, or he was helping me with something, or I'd gotten hurt and he was checking to make sure I was okay. I remember one night," Celeste continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "I was 12, and I tried to fight him off. I scratched his face pretty badly. The next morning, you had a black eye. He told me that was what happened when I didn't cooperate. You got hurt. The night you got detention," I said suddenly. "When you were 15, you said you talked back to your math teacher." "I didn't just talk back," she said. "I completely lost it. Mrs. Patterson was explaining some concept, and she used the word penetrate in reference to understanding a difficult problem. I heard that word, and I just snapped. I started screaming at her, telling her she was disgusting, that I wouldn't listen to her perverted language. That was the night he put you in the hospital. Yes, I came home from Delilah's house the next day and saw you trying to cover the bruises with makeup. I knew it was my fault. I knew that my rebellion had cost you, and I swore I'd never fight him again." "It wasn't your fault," I said fiercely. "None of it was your fault. You were a child. So were you. In a way. You were 25 when you married him, but you were still so young, so naive about what men like him were capable of." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the weight of what had been shared. Outside, the wind had picked up even more, and I could hear the old oak tree in the backyard creaking ominously. Marcus had always talked about cutting it down, said it was too close to the house, but I'd fought him on it. It was the one battle I'd won, and now I was glad. That tree had been my witness, my silent companion through all the years of suffering. "How did it finally stop?" I asked. "The night he went to the hospital, when you had those terrible injuries. I saw you lying there, unconscious, with all those machines beeping around you, and something inside me just broke. I realized that I'd rather die than let him hurt you anymore." "What did you do?" "I told him that if he ever touched me again, I would tell everyone. I didn't care what happened to me anymore. I was done protecting his secret. I think he could see that I meant it, because he never came near me again after that. But you were only 15. 15. But I felt ancient. I felt like I'd lived 100 lifetimes in that house." She paused, looking around the kitchen with an expression of disgust. I started counting down the days until I could leave for college. Every morning, I'd cross another day off my calendar, like a prisoner marking time until release. "Is that why you went so far away for school?" Seattle felt like another planet, as far from this house as I could get while still being in the same country. I remember the day I left for college. I stood in the driveway with my suitcase, and I swore I'd never spend another night under this roof. But you came back, for holidays, for visits. "I came back for you," she said simply, "because I couldn't bear the thought of leaving you alone with him. But every visit was torture. Being in this house, seeing him, pretending everything was normal. It was like dying a little bit each time." "There's something else," I said quietly. "Something I need to show you. Something I've been keeping in the basement." Celeste followed me down the creaky stairs to the finished basement where Marcus used to watch television and drink beer. Behind the water heater, hidden in a plastic box, was my insurance policy, the documentation I'd been collecting for years. "I've been planning to leave him for a long time," I said, pulling out the box. I just never had the courage to actually do it. Inside were photographs of my injuries, medical records, a journal documenting every incident of abuse, and something else. A small digital recorder and several USB drives. I started recording him 3 years ago, I explained. Just in case. I hid this recorder in the kitchen, in that little decorative bowl where I keep the spare keys. It's voice activated, so it captured everything that happened in that room. Celeste's eyes widened. You have recordings of him? Hours of them. Him screaming at me, threatening me, saying things that would destroy his reputation if they ever got out. I paused, my hands trembling as I held one of the USB drives, including recordings of him talking about you. What kind of things? Things that would put him in prison if he were still alive. Things that prove what he did to you wasn't just abuse. It was calculated, deliberate torture designed to break your spirit and keep you silent. Celeste was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. What are you going to do with all of this? I don't know. Part of me wants to expose him and to make sure everyone knows what he really was. But another part of me just wants to bury it and move on with what's left of our lives. Can I hear one of the recordings? I hesitated. The recordings were brutal, filled with language and threats that would be hard for anyone to hear, especially his daughter. But Celeste was an adult, and she deserved to make her own choices about what she could handle. I selected a recording from about a year ago and played it on the small device. Marcos's voice filled the basement, cold and vicious, exactly as I remembered it. You're nothing without me, he was saying. A pathetic, worthless woman who couldn't survive a day on her own. And that daughter of yours, she's just like you. Weak, stupid, useless. The only good thing about her is that she learned to keep her mouth shut when I needed her to. She was always such an obedient little girl. I stopped the recording quickly, but not before I saw the impact on Celeste's face. She looked like she'd been slapped, and I immediately regretted letting her hear it. He really did see us as nothing, she whispered. Yes, but you know what? He was wrong. We survived him. We outlasted him. And we're still here. What do you think would have happened if you tried to leave while he was still alive? I considered the question seriously. I think he would have killed me. Not in a moment of rage, but carefully, methodically. He would have made it look like an accident. And then he would have had complete control over you. So you stayed to protect me, even though you didn't know about the abuse. I stayed because I was terrified. But yes, part of me stayed to protect you too. Even when I didn't know the full extent of what he was doing, I knew that if I wasn't there, you'd be completely at his mercy. At least with me there. His attention was divided. We climbed back up to the kitchen, carrying the box of evidence between us. The house felt different now, somehow smaller and less threatening. The secrets that had lived in its walls for so long were finally exposed to the light, and their power over us was beginning to fade. I've made a decision, I said as we sat back down at the table. I'm going to take some of these recordings to Detective Morrison. Not to press charges, obviously that's not possible now, but to make sure there's an official record of what Marcus really was. Why? Because there might be other women out there, other families he hurt. Men like Marcus don't limit their violence to one household. They're predators who hunt wherever they can find victims. And because I want to make sure that if anyone ever tries to paint him as a saint, there's evidence to the contrary. Celeste nodded slowly. I think that's the right thing to do. And I want you to know that if you ever decide you want to speak publicly about what he did to you, I'll support you completely. If you want to file a report, or write a book, or give interviews, I'll be right there beside you. I might want to do that someday, she said, but not yet. I'm still processing everything, still working through it in therapy. Take all the time you need. There's no rush. Healing isn't a race, it's a journey, and everyone has to walk it at their own pace. As the evening wore on, we talked about practical things. The funeral arrangements that still needed to be finalized, the insurance policies, the business that would need to be sold. But underneath it all was a sense of possibility that I hadn't felt in decades. You know what's strange? I said as we were cleaning up the kitchen. For the first time in 23 years, I'm not afraid of tomorrow. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm not afraid of it anymore. That's not strange, Celeste said. That's freedom. I want to do something, I said suddenly. Something symbolic. Something to mark the end of this chapter and the beginning of whatever comes next. What did you have in mind? I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up my wedding ring, which I'd removed before the funeral service. I'd worn it for 23 years, and it had left a permanent indent on my finger, a physical reminder of my bondage. I want to bury this, I said. Not with him, but separately. I want to bury it and everything it represents. Celeste smiled. I think that's a beautiful idea. We went out into the backyard, under the old oak tree that had witnessed so much of our pain. Using a small garden spade, I dug a hole in the soft earth and dropped the ring into it. As I covered it with dirt, I felt something inside me let go, a tension I'd been carrying for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to live without it. Mom, Celeste said as we stood there in the gathering darkness, I want you to know that I forgive you. For what? For not being able to protect me from everything. For not knowing what was happening. For staying with him as long as you did. I forgive you for all of it, because I understand now that you were doing the best you could with an impossible situation. I started crying then. Not the careful, tight, silent tears I'd perfected over the years, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the depths of my soul. Celeste held me while I cried, and for the first time in 23 years, I felt truly safe in another person's arms. I forgive you too, I whispered when I could speak again. For what? For growing up to be so much stronger than I ever was. For not needing me to save you. For saving yourself when I couldn't. For becoming the woman I always wanted to be, but was too afraid to become. As we stood in that backyard where so much pain had been endured, where so many secrets had been kept, I realized that healing wasn't just about surviving. It was about learning to live again. And for the first time since I was 25 years old, I was ready to try. Marcus Ashford was dead and buried, but Victoria Ashford was finally, truly alive. And tomorrow, for the first time in decades, I would wake up free.